I was just asking, are we on right yet? We live?
No, I can't be, but I just push the button. You ready?
Yeah, go ahead, push. Welcome everyone, glad to see everybody today. Last week was, last week was session 2. I don't have the handout. And one of the things that I asked you to look at was this quadrant. Did anybody get a chance to look at that? There were questions to ask about maybe where you were in the quadrant. I already told you I was barely a disciple, but there was the combatant, the exhausted, and the cynic. Okay, y'all are overwhelmed with this. It's not too late. I still want you to look at it, okay? Kind of see what's there. Because today we're going to talk about one of the quadrants. And one of the quadrants is the quadrant of the combatant. And under that, there's going to be an extended conversation that we're going to watch. That's going to basically be what it is to be a partisan mind. What is a partisan mind? And it's going to contrast the so-called partisan mind with the mind of Christ. That's what it's going to do. The combatant was defined as someone who was very, very high on hope, but somewhat low on humility. And some of those people were described as the people out front, sometimes leading the charge, very, very passionate about what they thought, but sometimes not recognizing some of the difficulties, some of the nuances, some of the complications that might go along with what you might believe. And I'll tell you, while he's getting this together and handing this out, one of the people that I thought in looking at this combatant was the Apostle Peter. I thought about Peter, and I wondered where he was, where Peter might have been in this quadrant, and what it would take for Peter to be humiliated just a bit, such that he would be able to temper that great hope and that great passion he had with humility and what that might make him. Can you think maybe what that might have been for Peter? Think about Peter's life. Peter's life, we talk about impetuous Peter. Think about through his life, I think about him being one of the first ones that Jesus called. Right? What else do you think of with Peter? Think about Peter seeing his mother-in-law healed. Think about Peter being one of the 3 that was at the Transfiguration. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Here you go, Shirley. Anything else you think about Peter? Yeah, Peter jumps up and cuts off that guy's ear. Yeah. Think Peter might have had quick reflexes, quick action. Do you think there was anything in Peter's life that maybe tempered his view of things, how he might respond to some things? Think about it.
I think being so close to Jesus does temper things, and those other things probably diminished, and he became more like Jesus.
Yeah, I think so. Can you think anything specific, Ray, that might have tempered Peter's enthusiasm?
When Jesus called him Satan.
Jesus called him, get behind me, Satan. Oh boy. What about that?
Well, the story that I always think of is, when Jesus is washing the feet, Peter says, no, don't do that to me.
Don't wash my feet.
And then he says, but I have to. And he says, well, then wash all of them.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's Peter.
That's pretty much Peter. Yeah, I think that pretty well defines him. How do you think Peter was after Jesus looked at him and said, "You're going to deny me 3 times"? Well, what do you think Peter's response to that was? Huh?
No way.
No way, God. I am Peter. I got this. All right? And then what happens? Yeah. And what do you think that did to Peter? What do you think that did to Peter's personality? What did it do to his persona? Ray, you said it made him more like Christ. How did it make him more like Christ? You think for a moment that might have taught Peter a little bit of humility? You think it could have done that?
Independence.
Huh?
And dependence.
And dependence.
On God
Yes.
rather than himself. Because
Yeah.
he didn't have the strength to do that on his own.
Yeah, I think knowing dependence on God is a statement of humility, right? Isn't that one of the same things? It sure is. Yeah, so when I read this through, when I think this through, I'm thinking the business of being a combatant, which is not a bad thing. Which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad trait to have. To be very passionate about something, to be very energetic about something, to be ready to go forward. Okay, we need those folks, but those folks need to be very careful that they temper some of that passion with a big dose of humility. Jerry, you want to start this? I want y'all to watch this session 3. And we're going to watch it just a little bit longer today.
As we get going on the after party, I think it's really helpful to give people a way to locate themselves, where they are relative to where we believe Jesus is calling them. And we gave them in the last session this 2x2 grid of hope and humility. And you can locate yourself. You could be predisposed to being combative on one quadrant. You could be predisposed to being cynical on another quadrant. And for a lot of people, I think, you can be predisposed to being exhausted.
When you think about Jesus' call to discipleship, it's not, the way Jesus did this is not, okay, here are these 6 things, memorize them. It's come and see. Follow me. We're in burnout and we're pressing forward when the gospel shows us a very different way. In Romans 12, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, and then through the renewing of your minds. So it really is possible to have that renewal and that rejuvenation of the way that you see the world and the way that you see each other. That's what I really like about these quadrants, is because it helps me to know, and what do I need to work on, as opposed to what does he need to work on, or what does she need to work on.
There's the power of God that I want to learn more about. That's our hope. That's why it begins with us.
You know, we all have sort of areas of that quadrant that we kind of naturally fall towards, and I fall towards the combative side of things. And one thing that is really clear from Scripture is that we are not to forsake the fight for justice. So there is a place for justice. It's a requirement that we pursue justice.
When you think about in Paul's letters to Timothy, it's fight, fight, fight. Don't be timid. Don't neglect to stir up the flame that's within you. Be a good soldier of Christ. And then he says, treat everyone with gentleness and kindness. Why? That's not a break from the fighting.
Right.
He says that's how you fight, so that people can be turned to repentance, those who have been held captive by the devil, like Paul says.
Gentleness is part of the fight.
Gentleness is part of the fight,
Yeah.
and that's exactly right. I mean, the fruit of the Spirit, fruit of the Spirit are not sweet little things to crochet and hang on the wall. The fruit of the Spirit are the way that the Spirit invades the present order and actually brings all things under the feet of Christ. That is a way of fighting.
Yeah.
It's not a break from it.
This leads us to where we're going with this session, which is, we're speaking to all people where they're at, but I think in some ways we're especially speaking to the person who tends towards the combative. Because what we want to present is, yeah, there actually is a combat. It actually, though, is a different combat than you may think is fighting. It's not what the world is telling you.
want to talk a bit about what it's like to be the combatant. And I can imagine that there are some people in this room right now who are combatants. And here's a good way to tell if you are or are not a combatant. If you're in a conversation, if you're in a room and you hear someone being wrong, do you feel almost this visceral need to react? And the extreme level of this is when somebody is so online that, you know, it's like, oh, hold on, I'll be at dinner soon, someone's wrong on the internet and I have to set them straight. If there's someone wrong in your presence, or you believe they're wrong, and you begin to feel this urge, this need to weigh in, you might be a combatant. I'm describing myself. When I'm in a group conversation and someone brings up something in an area that I feel like I know something about, or I feel strongly or passionately about, I have a strong urge to engage, a very strong urge. Now, to be clear, engaging is not always the wrong call. I'm not saying, oh, combatants, stand down, because remember, act justly is a non-optional command for Christians. But what is our temptation as combatants? Our temptation as combatants is to focus on the justice to the exclusion of the kindness and the humility. That's our temptation. That's the double-edged sword. That's the other edge of our sword, is that neglecting of kindness and humility. And that's something that I have had to become aware of in my own life. And to really sort of temper that initial instinct that says, somebody's wrong, I've got to pounce, and I've got to pounce right now. To take that breath, to pause, to make sure to check myself. Is this something that's coming out of pride? Is this something that's coming out of arrogance? Have I listened to them fully when I engage with them? How am I going to engage with them? These are the ways in which combatants should check themselves. And it's something that I've had to learn and relearn over the course of my life. You never get it fully and completely under control. And then the last thing is those times when you do fail, those times when you do have a moment where you're so aggressive that you actually start to hurt other people, to have the ability to say, I'm sorry. The partisan mind is essentially an identity marker. It's the way in which you would describe yourself. So, for example, if you ask me, who are you, David? I would say, I'm a Christian. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I'm an American. And then some people add on, I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat. Now, there's nothing at all wrong with being a member of a political party. But the real question is, how much of that is your identity? And so I was talking with somebody the other day, and they talked about how they're going to vote for one particular political party, no matter who the nominee is. And the explanation was, that's just who I am. In other words, it was a part of their identity in the same way that other things are also part of their identity. And that is what I suggest is quite dangerous when you become identified with a political party, so much so that it's essentially part of the descriptor of who you are. I think there's a very interesting relationship that exists between the partisan mind and combativeness. I look at the partisan mind as the rocket fuel for combativeness. Because when you have that partisan mind, it is part of your very identity. It is part of who you are to have these sets of ideas and to have this particular political affiliation. So you marry that mindset with a natural predisposition to combativeness, and you're going to see basically, in many ways, what the modern public square is. It's a bunch of people who are essentially acting as lawyers for their own political side. And what do lawyers do? Lawyers do, and their job, this is their job. If there's something negative about their side, like there's a failing or a flaw on their side, they'll either deny it or minimize it, shrink it, make it small. And if there's something good about their side, they'll magnify it, they'll blow it up to make it seem as if that's the dominant characteristic. this is what lawyers do. I've been in trials, and there's such a thing as bad facts. And so one of the things that you try to do when you're a lawyer for your client is to make those bad facts manageable and make the good facts the dominant facts in the jury's mind. Now, this all works in an adversarial legal system where the rules of evidence come into play. That's how we achieve justice. It is a lot harder for it to work like that in just the general public square, where there are no rules of evidence, there are no rules of ethics. It is a free-for-all. And I don't know if you've ever seen like a bunch of litigators be given a free-for-all set of rules. It can get ugly fast. Litigators work within a set of rules that moderate our worst instincts. The public square does not have those rules. And so what ends up happening is each of the partisan lawyers for their side are often tempted to indulge their worst instincts, where it goes from not just minimizing negative facts, but denying them outright. Not just acknowledging that your opponent has flaws, but blowing up those flaws all out of proportion to their actual sin. And that's a form of bearing false witness. That is not telling the truth about either your own side or the other side. It is a process of minimization and exaggeration. And once you see that process in play in political discourse, you can't unsee it. It is everywhere. And it's really important to know you're not learning when you're litigating. So what we're dealing with right now is just this fundamental us versus them dichotomy. If you're one of us, we've got your back. We will cover your flaws. We won't even acknowledge your flaws. If you're them, we won't acknowledge your virtues. We won't appreciate your virtues. All you are is flaws, because what we have to do is defeat you. And that is the fundamental polarizing dynamic of our politics. If you're in the category of us, you're fundamentally good. Your flaws are manageable. You deserve a defense. If you're category of them, you're fundamentally bad. Your flaws are dangerous, perhaps even catastrophically dangerous. And you know what? Your virtues aren't even worth mentioning. In fact, if we mention your virtues, that's bad because it might undermine our dedication to taking you on. If we humanize you, it undermines the commitment to destroy you. And if we acknowledge the flaws of our own side, it undermines our sense of loyalty. And so you can see how it drives us inexorably towards division, towards hatred, and ultimately towards violence. I would describe the us versus them divide in the United States with 3 words: gut-level hatred. And I use those words advisedly. I'm actually quoting a piece in the New York Times written by one of my colleagues who was describing the end result of an enormous amount of research around how do Americans feel about each other? How do Americans feel about their political opponents? And when you dive into that research, it is scary how negative and how hateful people are to each other. There's even a term called lethal mass partisanship. And what lethal mass partisanship means is there's a percentage of Americans, roughly in the 20% range, who actually believe the world would be better off if a significant numbers of the opposing party died. Not that they want to kill them, but the world would be better off if a significant number of the opposing party died. That's lethal mass partisanship. And you might have a glass half full perspective and say, well, only 20% of Americans feel that way. But that's 60 million people. That's 40 plus million adults with that view of their fellow man. That's stunning. And even if you back way away from that kind of sheer malice, you see Republicans and Democrats have almost mirror image negative views of each other. It's not like one side or the other is far more tolerant of each other's point of view. No, both Republicans and Democrats view the other side as brainwashed, as bigoted, as prejudiced, you name it. This sort of view of we're on one side not because we like our own side, but because we dislike the other. And it has been rising and rising steadily since the 1990s to the point where overwhelming majorities of Republicans and overwhelming majorities of Democrats have extremely hostile views of people on the other side. And there's even some indication that people are more open to someone marrying a person of a different faith than they are marrying a person of a different political party. And that would tell you what's the true religion. You see this constantly in the rhetoric. We are patriots. They are Marxists. We are tolerant. They are fascist. Note how dramatic that language is. Patriot versus Marxist. Tolerant versus fascist. It's not just wrong. You're claiming your opponents are wrong on a world historic scale, on the scale of Marxism, on the scale of fascism. Yet this is extremely common rhetoric. In Christian circles, you'll even hear the term demonic, that we are godly, they are demonic. And so their flaws aren't just simple mistakes. And so that level of rhetoric ratchets up the stakes. It doesn't just ratchet up the stakes. In many ways, it dehumanizes. It inhibits the ability to show kindness and humility. What reason is there to be humble in front of a fascist or a Marxist? What do they have to teach me? This kind of extreme rhetoric absolutely inhibits our ability to express the virtues that God calls us to express. The partisan mind inflicts grave damage on your neighbors, and it inflicts grave damage on yourself. So the way it damages your neighbors is easy and obvious to state. It makes you in many ways their adversary. It treats them as an adversary. Their loss becomes your gain. One of the things that invariably happens when you adopt that mindset is you magnify your own righteousness. It armors you against the humble and repentant heart that you should possess each and every day. Because if you have an humble and repentant heart, if you acknowledge your flaws, aren't you giving your enemy an opening? And you can never give your enemy an opening. And so what you're doing is you're building up in yourself a high degree of tolerance for your own sin, and you're inflicting on others a very low degree of tolerance and zero grace and no mercy for their flaws. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see how that hurts them and how it hurts you.
You stop it right here. I think that's probably plenty of fodder to talk about for right now. Anyone want to say anything right here?
I wrote down the question. He said this has been building since the 1990s. And we've had political differences for centuries. What is driving this huge intolerance, this extreme rhetoric? On each side of the fence, what's driving that? And, just this last week with the demonstrations and the violence and a couple years ago, why is that being tolerated?
Somebody want to answer that question?
The one thing that, there's a missionologist called Leslie Newbigin, and he wrote back in the 50s as he was seeing the increasing secularization of our society. He said that when people push God out, something's got to take its place. So back in the 50s and 60s, he was already writing that you're going to see people put their identity and their passion and their explosiveness into politics. That politics will replace, that will be the new faith. So that's one response. I don't know that but that's what Newbigin predicted 60 years ago, what he saw coming.
Yeah.
Well, I think a major factor.
Speak up just a little bit.
I think a major factor is social media, face devil, as Jenny said, because people can say what it's kind of hard when you're face to face with somebody to say you're the dumbest thing I ever saw and you're a fool. But it's not that hard to just write it on the internet and out there for everybody to see, and there's no accountability.
No accountability. Someone else.
Protesters don't protest alone. They
Say?
get- Protesters do not protest alone. They get a group together because they feel like there's power in numbers.
So there's this mob mentality.
Mob mentality is that, and that, I think, comes from what you see on the news, you see on, and news is more accessible now than it has ever been. Between that and social media, like in the past week, I think there's people that probably participate in that on their own would have never thought to go there. But they saw it, and thus they saw that, they thought it was okay because somebody else was doing it.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think we've seen protests and we've seen all kind of opposition and conflict. We just have it more covered today by 24/7 news.
So you think it's not anymore,
I think it's always been present.
always been present?
You know, you take the Vietnam War time, you take the racial time, you go back to Civil War time, you go back to the Revolution. You know, I think it's just more in our face, and I also think that because of that social media dynamic, that 24/7, both sides are always majoring on vilifying the other and magnifying theirs, just like you referenced, and you know, and so the extremism of either side, you know, leads to a shift by the populace in following that rhetoric.
I agree with that, man. Yeah. Dan?
I can't remember where I heard it, but a couple of days ago, I heard them talking about the kids that are involved in a lot of this, Antifada, pro-Hamas group. And you'd ask them what they were, and they don't really understand what they're, but these kids don't have anything in their lives at all. They don't, of course, they don't have religion. That's gone from their lives. A lot of them don't have, are disconnected from family, so they want something in their life, and this is something they can join a group and do something, whether they truly believe it or not. They just want to belong to a group.
How about for a moment, if we didn't argue the rightness or the wrongness of what somebody thought, okay? How about, and we're talking about the college student thing and the protest for now, okay? What if I said that there's a lot of right in what they were doing, okay, and what they believe? What if I just throw that out there? There's a right in what they believe. Then how might I be critical of them? Well, let's just for a moment, let's go back to next week. Let's talk about this diagram that they put together here, okay? Where hope is here, increasing hope, and basically they made a quadrant out of this, okay? All right? And they defined this area right here as the area of the combatant, okay? The combatant is very, very high on hope. And look, let's put some more words for hope here. How about conviction? How about belief?
Expectation.
How about expectation? Very, very high on this right here. Their idea of what social justice might be, okay? But what if we robbed that of this side, which is humility, okay? Humility. What are some other thoughts about what humility might be? A lack of humility prevents you from doing what? What would a lack of humility prevent?
Listening.
How about that? How about a lack of humility prevents you from listening to what anybody else has to say? Okay, so there's no listening. What else might a lack of humility prevent? Huh?
Compromise.
It might prevent compromise, right? What else might it prevent?
Empathy?
Empathy. You may not in any way begin to see their side of things, right?
Understanding.
Understanding. Yeah. Okay. These are positive things, I would say. Okay. What are some negative things that it might cause?
Anger.
Yeah. A lack of humility may in fact cause anger. What else might it cause?
Threaten.
Huh?
Threaten
Yeah, you might want to threaten the other person.
or feel threatened.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
Militants.
Militants. Yeah.
Pride?
Pride.
Grievance.
Grievance. How about you just want to attack them? How about physically you might want to just smack them in the face, huh? I mean,
So aggression.
aggression, aggressive behavior. Yeah. I think that we need to recognize that there's good in this. There's good in having hope. There's good in having passion. There's good in having conviction about something, okay? We need to have that. And yet, when our hope, let's say this different, when our individual or our small group, our mob group comes together, okay, and we have these ideas that are not in any way engendered by some element of humility, which is we might be wrong or they may have a point, okay? When that's the case, boy, you're through the roof over here, and all you can do, ultimately, I think, is go smack them in the face if that's what it takes to win it. Yeah.
It reminds me of the old black and white Western kind of things where the lynch mobs, you know, they come in to get somebody out of jail and just go hang them or whatever before the trial kind of thing. You know, everybody gets all hyped up on emotions and stuff.
Yeah.
And they want to, quote, do the right thing because they all think he's guilty or they all think whatever. And they don't want to listen to reason. They don't want to wait for, they don't want to calm down and wait for the right things to happen or do things in an orderly fashion or whatever. They're mad. They want something to happen.
Does it remind anybody of anything else?
Jesus.
Reminds you?
With Jesus.
The mob with Jesus? Yeah. Let me tell you what this reminds me of. This reminds me of some church conflicts that I've heard.
Amen.
Hear me?
Yes.
Anybody here ever been part of a church conflict? You know, I feel like I've got some pretty strong convictions, okay? But I will tell you, my pretty strong conviction list has gotten a whole lot shorter over the years.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Has anybody here experienced that?
Yes.
I had a really good friend. I think we were sophomores in high school. Okay. That would have been about 68, 69, somewhere in that time. What? 69. Okay.
Long time ago.
It's a while ago. But let me tell you what, at that point in time, there was a movement which swept the nation. And it was largely, in many ways, it was a Pentecostal-like move. Do y'all remember that? They referred to it as the Jesus movement. Do you remember that, Ralph? You don't remember. And in the Jesus movement, when it came to Tulsa High School, okay, some of my friends were very much caught up in that, okay? Very much caught up in the Jesus movement. I didn't get caught up in the Jesus movement. I didn't need anything to do with the Jesus movement. You know why? Because I went to Bel Air Church of Christ, and I tell you what, I had everything I needed right there, and I knew where I was. I'd been baptized when I was 11 years old, 10 years old, whatever, okay? And I didn't need any of that Jesus movement stuff, okay? So I remember some of my very best friends, one of my very best friends came to me. And we started having some conversation, religious conversation, okay? And we had probably 5 or 6 points. I want you to know, I beat him to a pulp on every single point there was, because I knew Scripture. I'd grown up in church, and I knew it. And you want to hear something? This guy was Methodist. They ain't studied much. They ain't studied much. And I mean, I just want you to know, I nailed him. Go get him, Steve. There's a lot that hasn't changed with some of us. Some of us are still incredibly argumentative, incredibly hopeful, incredibly educated, incredibly knowledgeable about what we believe, very, very passionate, and we sure lack humility.
Is it narrow-minded?
No, it's not narrow-mindedness. Y'all hear this? Okay. So, I mean, this whole subject is, it's about the politics of the world, okay? But I see the politics of the world, much like you say, Randy, I'm not sure that it's always been with us in some way. It's certainly become more public. And what Jerry had to say, I think that's probably, I think everybody that had a point to make about this, I think you're all very, very right. It is and does seem to be very much more apparent. And what, in my mind, is driving most of this is individualism. Okay, individualism. Now, what do I mean by individualism? What do I mean by that? Look here, I respect very much what you have to say. That's great. You have every right in the world to say it, even though you're wrong. Okay? Because I'm right. And what I think is right is going to be how I judge each and every one of you. Okay? What I think is right. And I have the right. I am an American, and I have the right as an individual to say whatever I want to say and think whatever I want to think. Period. All right? And there's nothing that's gonna, you don't need to convince me, because I know it. All right? I know it. And given protection, such that a guy's arm's length or a TV channel away from me, I can say whatever I want to say. I can say whatever I want to say, no matter how bad it hurts you, no matter what the consequences might be, I can say it, and I'll be right to say it. And it's carried over into the politics of the world. It has. Now, I don't want to, I'm not here today to correct the politics of the world. Because I think that we're going down that path. I think it's a dangerous path. I think it ultimately will be a path that will, if it has not already hurt us as a country in an incredible way, it sure is going to. I'm here to say the politics of the outside world cannot become the politics of the church. It just can't. It can't be the politics of your family. It can't be the politics of your family. Boy, some of you guys and girls have been married a while. I'm thinking of some times in the way that I grew up that when I reflect on it are so wrong. So wrong. I'm thinking about 1982. That Margaret and we bought a piece of property. Oh, this was a good thing. I would moonlight, and back then I could work some at the VA, and they paid me $12 an hour working at the VA. But if I went out to a private, to an emergency room out in the country somewhere, they'd pay me $25 or $30, Ralph. You remember those days?
Oh, yeah.
Man, I'll tell you what, you could go out there, you could work out there, you work for like, you work 24 hours, or in some places they give you a 40-hour shift all weekend long. And I can remember just coming back, riding back 40 times 27. 40 times 27. Good gracious, man, we've hit it. And every time we'd come back, we'd put that in the bank. And we wanted to have us little farms. We'd come back to Oklahoma and we'd buy us a little bit of acreage. And we wound up with about 40 acres out on Turkey Creek Road, okay? And then there was an opportunity to buy a place right next to us, but it needed some help. So I thought, yeah, I knew a couple of guys here at church that were young, kind of our age. I thought, let's involve them. Let's involve them. Because they might want to build a house back there. And I'll never forget something that I'm very, very ashamed of, because they came to the house, okay, I'll never forget. And the couples, they kind of wanted to end it. I said, look, this is a guy's thing. The guys need to figure this out, okay? And I'm so ashamed of that. Because it was just, I was so fixed into how business was done in my parents' and grandparents' age, and I do think it was done that way, that I hadn't come to a point in my life where I was ready to include my wife in those sorts of things, okay? And that was a perfect example to me. It was a perfect example to me. Man, I was passionate about what we were doing, and I was not doing anything that Margaret didn't want to do either. But I'll tell you what, I was really low on humility. Really low on humility. It was mine to do. Y'all have had those experiences yourself. We all have. We go back, I guarantee you, there's not a one of you, if you just think for a minute and look back to a decision that you made, and difficult decisions, big decisions that you made, and you look back and you see those decisions and you realize, man, I was absolutely full of myself, even the right kind of thing, but I didn't garner it with humility, okay? And the fact of the matter is, maybe it was just a wrong decision. Y'all hear that? Has anybody here had those experiences? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey, it's confession time. We're on TV. This is not the Catholic tradition. You're not walking in and speaking to a priest on the other side of the wall, okay? This is for all of Tullahoma to hear. But no, I can name you a bunch of those for me. I can name you a bunch of those because, you know, when we sit and listen to David talk about it, okay? This is a guy that, I'll tell you what, I haven't known him before this series, but I'll bet you he was a fireball. I'll just bet you he was a fireball. I would bet being an attorney and being in a legal system, Ralph, how far along do attorneys get if they're meek and gentle and quiet, peaceable? How far along do those folks get?
They do a lot of estate planning.
Do you hear that? I mean, really? That's got, I mean, I'm really thinking, how many people want to go see a surgeon, okay? You want to go see a surgeon, and the surgeon said, they say, you know, can you do this? How good? Well, you know, there's a lot of guys out there that are a lot better than I am, and you know, I do a few and I lose a few. You know, y'all hear that? We need to be careful how we define humility. We need to be very careful about that. But I would just say that in most everything that we're involved in, you've got to have a good dose of it. You've got to have a good dose, always backing that. If you're all here and not enough here, you're not where you need to be. What else do we have here?
You mentioned the church context.
Yeah.
Isn't that what legalism does? I mean, you learn it all, you study it all, you know it all. So the only thing left to do is just to judge you and condemn you, because if you was was as loving and studied as I am, then you would see it. If you don't see it, then you just don't love the truth, right?
So what Randy is addressing is the subject of legalism, okay? And I suppose underlying that question of legalism is within a system of legalism, is there humility? Okay? Because after all, legalism, right? Would somebody define legalism for me? Just define legalism. Roger, can you define that?
It's a very literal interpretation.
A literal interpretation? Well, I think that's part of it.
Precision, obedience.
Precision obedience. Precision obedience to what?
To the law,
To
the
the law.
letter of the law.
To the
So-
thing I
You
decided.
have
To
to
the
determine
jot
what
and
those
to the
rules are.
What did you say?
I said, it's precision obedience to the rules, but you are going to determine what those rules are. And your rules may not be someone else's rules, but you are going to impose, if you're a legalist, you're going to impose your rules on everyone.
So if you reduce the message of Christ, if you reduce what we do out here to a group of our rules, okay? And if you judge yourself to be right or wrong by whether you follow those rules or not, okay? That would be legalism, right? Okay. And I think I know what Randy is saying is when you take that group of rules that you have established, okay, and you project that group of rules on someone else, okay, right? Then, in fact,
Whether they know the rules or not, it's not important. They still have to follow them.
and
Sex fertile proportion.
and what underlies the presumption that you can establish a set of rules? What underlies that?
You're always right.
It's the right way to go.
A lack of humility. Okay. All right. So now
It's the knowledge that puffs
now
up.
let's leave this just a moment. Stop just one moment. I want to argue the other side of this. Okay. So we've got this lack of humility. We got this lack of humility that we're talking about that causes legalism. Okay. So, do we have any rules at all? Are there any rules? Okay, are there any rules? And if you have any rules at all, are those rules that are built on a lack of humility? All right?
Could be, but don't have to be.
Doesn't that depend on the source?
Say what?
Doesn't that depend on the source from where you make your rules or your guidance or whatever? Doesn't that matter?
I think
If it's something I just come up with on my own, well, that does not worth anything. But if it's based on the things that God says and the things that Christ said and the things Christ did, then those carry weight.
yeah.
Well, and we've been studying the Sermon on the Mount, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees followed the letter of the law. And Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law, but God wants things to come from the heart. That's where the Pharisees and the Sadducees are wrong.
Okay.
And you can talk about that being humility, but that it's got to be more heartfelt than
Okay.
just following somebody's rules.
So you're touching on the motivation.
The love, yes.
You're talking about, you're on motivation to follow the rules.
I'm not,
okay?
Jesus was expounding and saying,
Uh-huh.
it's gotta be a matter of your heart, not your action. And so I think that means a lot, it shows a lot of humility in that, to be part of, coming from the heart.
Isn't part of humility taking other people into account? And that's a heart thing.
Okay, so let me just for a moment, okay? I mean, these are, look, I've asked a hard question. I've asked a hard question that I do not have a good answer for right now. I think I could come up with it in a little bit, but I can't get it out right now, okay? What I've said is, when I run into a Buddhist that has no belief whatsoever in Jesus, okay, and I disagree with him on Jesus, okay, and on salvation, and I do, all right, am I disagreeing with him? Am I being combative? Am I expressing that with humility? Can I believe anything? Can I believe anything without some doubt in my mind out of humility? Does humility cause me to doubt everything I believe? Huh?
You can put love down by humility if you approach people.
Jerry, you got an answer for this?
I think that's right. The one rule is love of God and neighbor, right?
Yeah.
So a big facet of that. A lot of people say the fruit of the Spirit is love's not separate, but it's love, and then peace, patience, kindness, self-control, humility is all part of it. But if I'm loving the Buddhist before me, I'm wanting him to embrace the truth, right? So I'm not giving up what I believe is reality, but I'm making sure that I'm considering where he's coming from, how it can be heard, and that I treat him as I want to be treated. I don't know if that's-
Does everybody hear that? Okay. I think I really like what these guys have done with humility and hope. I really like that. Okay. I like that a lot. Okay? But I think this has to be undergirded with this idea of love. Okay. Now we haven't gotten to that yet here. Okay. And I'm not sure they're going to get to it. Okay. But I think both of these things have to be, like I say, they've got to be based on a love that is real for humanity, for other people. You hear that?
And that starts with the love of God.
Starts with a love for God, yes. So again, if I could just today is, I'm not the combatant spirit, okay? To a degree, you know, if I'm here, if I'm the cynic and want to withdraw and just basically say you're a bunch of idiots, you wouldn't understand if I told you, I think you need to be moving up into here, okay? All right? But if you're here, we need to all pick up a little bit of humility in our thinking so we can move on over into here. All right. Did you just give me a little feedback? Was this too much? Was it not enough time? Are you okay listening to this? Okay. Okay. 'Cause I think they do a really good job with that. All right. Well, we're done. That was 2 bells. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Thank you very much for being with us. Next week, we're going to continue this 3.